Welcome to Modern Musings, conversations with the maiden, mother, and crone, looking at ourselves and the world through the lens of the 21st century. Hello and welcome back. I'm your hostess, Kristen, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Amber and Cindy.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. If this is your first time joining us, we're glad to have you here, and if you're returning, then welcome back. Today, we are talking about neurodivergent, the term neurodivergent, neurospicy. I've heard that one coming around lately.
One. Okay.
And some
I
people,
like it.
Yeah. And neurodiversity. So Amber's got a little bit of education in some counseling, right? Because you're going to get your master's.
Yes, I am.
And we had Ashley as a guest.
Yes, my
one
niece
episode,
Ashley.
and we talked about like some mental health topics. And this one I wanted to bring up as an episode itself because obviously we are neurodiverse, the three of us, and we have mentioned multiple times different things that make us neurodivergent. And I had not heard that term until maybe in the past few years.
Yeah,
maybe it's like a
TikTok
kind of term.
Yeah.
I think that my generation is, the generation of ADD diagnosis generation. And
the
so
generation of labels.
Well, I think so. I think we
started
on
labeling at
yes.
some point, and you weren't just, broken like you were in the 70s and the 60s. Now you have this special label,
right.
And we're exploring more about what it is to be in those and really like defining them more. And I think that my generation, now that we're a little bit older, now we're parents and, surviving the adulting now for 20 years. We've been adulting 20 years now. So now we have social.
Though?
Yeah, we've been social media experience, expressing our experience through social media. And so I've been seeing that term like on TikTok and YouTube.
Oh, man, yeah. Facebook is like what?
Well, and a lot of people, your age they have kids that
who are going through it too.
Right.
Yeah. So, YouTube, best friend ever. You can learn whatever you want on there.
Doesn't mean it's right though.
You know what though? Just people sharing their experience.
Yes,
it is right because everyone's experience is unique, and whether it's correct, quote unquote, or not, that's what neurodiversity is all about, right? But what I'm saying is like, someone can tell you how to change like a carburetor on a car the wrong way, yes, but I'm talking about experiences, not like how-tos, right? I guess that is the how-to though, is someone else's experience and how they cope with it. I've really enjoyed watching like YouTube videos of other people who are neurodiverse, such as myself, and what they do to cope.
Right.
I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was in 4th grade. And along with that, my school also provided services to teach me how to manage my ADHD in the classroom by teaching me how to use a day planner and teaching me how to study. And those are the two things that I probably have carried with me through the rest of my life and use those every day. Maybe at the time it wasn't as beneficial, but I'll look back now and I'm like, wow, had I not learned those two things, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. I would probably be living in a cardboard box under an overpass. Just being honest, because
sadly many of those people, that is
and
the problem.
And that's why I think it's so amazing that people can have a voice about their neurodiversities and share that with the world, because other people have that access to their fingertips and can see how other people are coping. Because yes, you can medicate ADHD, for example. You can medicate it, but it doesn't help cope. It doesn't help you overcome the day-to-day, because those things are still there. You still have to learn how to study. You still have to learn.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of dulls it anyway. Like, medication is never an answer, like a full-on answer.
Yeah,
for
it's
anything.
always multi-layered.
Yeah, even if you have, some other type of, developmental disorder or
depression, anxiety.
Right. The medicine is only part of it.
Right.
There, you have to go through the motions, right? Exactly like depression. You have to work through those things that cause it, right? So medicine is just an aid.
Yes.
So, that's, I wanted to talk about it because I keep hearing that word neurodivergent, and what does that exactly mean? What all falls under that? Who all is neurodivergent? Because it seemed like the more I hear it, the more everybody else is saying it, and I'm like, are we all neurodivergent? So, in a sense,
that is a theory.
I mean, theoretically, yeah, I believe we all are.
Yeah.
We're all on a spectrum.
Well, and we're all diverse. So
we are diverse.
We are all not the exact same,
yes.
right?
None of us are the same.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is the opposite of what people are calling neurodivergent? There's a term.
Is it neurotypical?
Yes.
Neurotypical,
Yes,
yes.
thank you. Neurotypical is the norm.
Which is is kind of like an average. It's like saying it's an average of people are kind of in this average zone of behavior.
But they also probably have quirks too.
Yes.
Well, there is no normal.
Like there is nothing that's normal.
So funny, like as a kid, I was always like told, why don't you just be normal? Why don't you just be normal? But as an adult, I realized that there is no normal, that being abnormal is normal.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I know. I like being weird.
I'm a little weird.
I like being weird. So I was actually looking at what neurodiversity is, because I also that word had popped up when I was thinking about what I wanted to discuss. And neurodiversity is just that. It's diverseness within humankind brain development, and there's lots of different things that make us diverse. So even cultural diversity, trauma makes us diverse. There's things that are not necessarily things that happen, externally, like cultural,
but genetic things make us,
and and then there's things like having specific learning disorders or OCD, depression, anxiety. Those are two.
Autism spectrum disorder.
Yes, autism spectrum. Dyslexia is also considered part of neurodiversity. Down syndrome. And Tourette's, amongst others. So I thought that was really interesting because as I was looking at this image, it's got like everything kind of in a circle. And I was like, I have that, I have that, I have that. So I was like, wow, I am very diverse. But actually I was really surprised to see auditory processing on there.
That
is
definitely one too. So
so
anything that's like a little bit out of the ordinary, pretty much.
Yeah, everything that's
it's
outside
not typical.
The normal function. Yeah. So
I don't like the word normal though, because
I know
I really don't think like it's like you were talking about. I don't think there is a such thing as normal. There is a typical. And I don't even know how typical is, but they basically, it's like taking the weight of all these people and putting them in a list and finding, you're not really finding the average, but you're finding that the mean is in this range, and that's what they're calling typical. So like the typical woman weighs X number of pounds, the typical man weighs X number of pounds. And so then they're using the neurodiversity to come up with what is typical. And that is, typically you can read without swapping, transposing letters or numbers. You are typically not overactive or have attention deficit. You are typically not depressed, typically not anxious. And so when you take all those things, that's what composes neurotypical. So how many people
that is changing, kind of like that? Oh, yes.
Well, I was just going to say we don't even know how many people are actually neurotypical, because it could be that there is no such thing as neurotypical, that it could be that everyone has something that is neurodiverse.
I mean, I don't think, I think that really there's no neurotypical anymore. I would say that, like, when I was a kid, like, those kind of things, and I believe we were having this conversation the other day, were kind of repressed. If you were just a little bit different than the norm, those things were repressed.
Right.
Like, I know that if I acted a little bit differently, I was told to stop acting like that.
Mm-hmm.
When I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in my early 20s, I was told that I shouldn't tell anybody that, because people would look at me a certain way.
Right.
Because that's not, quote unquote, normal.
Right.
To have manic depression, to be depressed, to have bouts of mania or bouts of depression. That's not normal. But I found, as I've gotten out in the world, that a lot of people are depressed, especially since COVID.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people have these episodes. It was just swept under a rug when I was a kid.
Well, it's just like when I was a child, if you were left-handed, a lot of times parents and school teachers would fight it and try to teach you to be right-handed. And because it was so much easier to teach
most people are right-handed. Yeah,
most people, that is neurotypical to be right-handed. So if you were left-handed, they would try to change that if they could. And there were very few left-handed people back, when I was a kid. There's probably more left-handed people now, because we've allowed children to just gravitate to whatever they tend to do. And usually they figure it out, sometime, by kindergarten, first grade or whatever. But that wasn't always the case. And it's the same with a lot of other things, like a lot of kids were undiagnosed with dyslexia, dysgraphia, what is the dyscalculus, some of those other ones, because they didn't even recognize that it was a thing to start with. And then they didn't know what to do with them once they figured it out, so.
Like my dad, he turned out, later in life, in his 60s, that, you're dyslexic or whatever. Right, and it's just like, oh.
Well, I personally was never diagnosed with ADHD, not even as an adult. But because my daughter was diagnosed with ADHD, I learned about the symptoms and came to the conclusion that I probably was. Mm-hmm. And I had doctors concur, although it never was, I never went through the process of having it diagnosed for me. And same thing with my depression. I've had doctors that concurred that I was probably depressed, and they gave me medication, but I never had a label of depressive disorder on any of my medical things. My son, then, he also
might be a good thing.
Well, my son also was diagnosed with ADHD, and so I feel very confident that I do have ADHD. I feel pretty confident that my mother might have had it as well, just retrospectively looking at her behaviors. But I also believe that she had or has OCD, and that she might be somewhere on the autism spectrum. Now, those things, we didn't even know what autism was when she was a kid. There was no, even when in the 70s, that when they talked about autism, they were talking mostly about children who were catatonic,
or not audible,
or not. They had no, they weren't. They didn't speak. So they didn't know that there was such a thing called Asperger's. They didn't know about high functioning autism. And, I know so many autistic people who have IQs out the roof, and yet they are labeled as autistic or on the spectrum, so that makes them neurodivergent. But many years ago, they might have been labeled as they had this umbrella term that we don't like to use anymore called mental retardation. And it was assumed that everyone who had mental retardation had a low IQ and basically couldn't take care of themselves. And, they lumped Down syndrome into that category. There's all kinds of things that we now know are completely different, but they were all lumped into that one category of mental retardation. And, we don't like to use that word anymore, but it was the clinical term that was used at the time.
Yeah, back before that, they just stuck everybody into an asylum.
They did. They just put them in the hospital, and they live there. And
so Kristen and I would probably, and you too, would be in an asylum.
Possibly so.
It was like
because I caused too much trouble
100 years ago.
Yeah.
And to our last episode, we are too much.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're hysterical.
Yeah, hysterical. Yeah. So I think we're becoming more aware of that diversity and more aware that diversity doesn't have to be a negative thing. I think that's the best part of our increased knowledge about neurodiversity, because we're learning
and
that we can all be different. We can all be different, and that is our gift. My son is a truly gifted mathematician. He's an extremely good cello player, and he's just so smart. It's unbelievable. But he is neurodivergent, but he has this incredible gift of math. I think there are many people throughout history who have been inventors and writers and creators of all kinds who were neurodiverse, and that neurodiversity is what made them so special.
Definitely. Or, because we determined that like depression and mental illness was part of neurodiverse, and definitely a lot of writers and artists and
look at Virginia Woolf and Edgar Allan Poe. There's Oscar Wilde. There's so many fabulous writers. There's so many fabulous artists who were tragic.
Van Gogh.
Yeah. Right. So I love that we're doing that. I really think it's good that we're recognizing that. And so to me, neurodivergent is the norm, I think. I really think that neurodivergence is the norm.
Neurodiversity, yeah.
We are just neurodiverse.
Yeah.
Just as we are all racially diverse, we are emotionally diverse, we are experientially diverse. That diversity among us is in every aspect, including our neuro makeup. And so, to try and say this is normal, that is normal, that is, it may be typical, but I don't believe that there is a whole lot of people who fit in that category of typical. Because I feel
not
like
anymore.
Right, because honestly, when you start stripping away everything that makes you unique in that diversity, right?
Right.
You're not really left with much.
No. Yeah.
And then that kind of makes you wonder, like, is that person that's typical, is that really normal?
Right. So, the nice thing about recognizing that we're not all neurotypical, that we are neurodivergent, is that we are learning, our education system is improving and bending and adapting.
Still has a long way to go.
It does. It's hard to teach in a way that you address the needs of every single student. It is. It's hard. Unless you have a teacher for every single student. So, you have to kind of take broad stripes. We're going to try to do this, and we're going to try to do this, and hopefully we can catch most of the kids in that net of, teaching styles or whatever. But because of our neurodivergence, we learn in different ways, we experience things in different ways, but it doesn't mean that we can't learn. It doesn't mean that we can't experience. I was just reading an article in my Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine about blind students who were at a Texas State Park kayaking on the river, and they were not guided by someone who could see. They were all legally blind. And it's usually an adult and a child in the kayak, but both of them were blind.
Wow, that's fascinating.
But they learned how to navigate on the river by tuning into their other senses. So, actually it was a lake, I think, or maybe it was a river. I can't remember. But they were, they listened for the cars going over the overpass and the water going through the columns that hold up the overpass that crosses over the lake, and the sounds of the water hitting the dock and people jumping into the water and things like that, and you can hear the paddles hitting the sides of the kayak as a clue that there's a kayak somewhere close to you. So I haven't finished reading the whole article, but it was like really fascinating, because my first thought when they were talking about taking blind people kayaking was that, oh, you're going to have a sighted person in the kayak with a blind person, and you're going to go out there and paddle them around the lake. But no, they were fully independent blind people kayaking around this lake. And I just thought that was fascinating. So it just goes to prove that
we can adapt.
You can adapt, and you can do things in different ways so that everyone can experience those things. And just like they're making more of the state parks handicap accessible, they've got like boardwalks and things that are wheelchair accessible and things like that. And they have programs for the blind and things like that. So I think it's fascinating, and I think it's wonderful that we are recognizing the need for that, and changing things so that it helps. So
that is good.
So earlier I said neurospicy, and this was a newer term that I have just recently heard, maybe in the past couple of months. Another one that I got from TikTok, someone said neurospicy, and there was actually a person who was kind of offended by the term neurospicy, and I disagreed with them.
I think
I'm not going to get in my feels because someone is embracing
their uniqueness.
Their uniqueness, absolutely. And it's something that, took me into being an adult to embrace myself, that I am different. Obviously, we're all different, but that my little quirks are what make me who I am, and also what make me amazing.
Yes,
because like Steven, my brother, he's he's very gifted, and that's what one of the things that makes him amazing. And he struggles, with some of the things like, conversational elements of normal,
social awkwardness.
Yeah.
And
I wouldn't even say awkwardness. I think he just, comes to the table differently than other people do when it comes to
because he loves having a good conversation.
Yes.
But he's a little more shy. He's not going to be the one that starts the conversation usually.
Mm-hmm.
And
but I think that spicy is, sometimes people think of spicy as like too much, right? Or
back to
it's
that
hot.
too much
I know,
thing.
right?
Yeah.
It's too much.
I know.
It's hot, and some people don't like hot. So maybe that person was feeling that way because they don't like spicy. I don't know.
It may be that because there are some people who get offended on behalf of others.
That too.
So,
yes.
So if they are taking that as a slight against someone, maybe they're not neurodiverse themselves, but they have a loved one who is, and they don't want, they're defending that person, so I can see that too.
Yeah.
I kind of like the spicy label because it's spice.
I identify with it.
Spice adds interest to your food. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
And so having neurodiversity adds spice to your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think spice is a bad thing. I don't want to be dull. Now, going back to, like you were talking about how it took you a long time to embrace that, this is typical of, junior high, teenagers, well, even elementary school. We want to blend in. We want to fit in. We're taught that you should be like all the other kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're always striving to be as much like them as we can. And so we don't embrace our own differences. But I think you're right. Our differences are what make us special. I would not be the person I am if it weren't for the spiciness in me. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe we're going back to that thing of like last week, too much, but I don't think there is such a thing as too much. Going back to that thing, once you know why someone is the way they are, then it changes your outlook on accepting who they are for who they are.
Yeah.
And we should always, whether we know why they are the way they are or not, we should always accept people for who they are as they are. But helping, it just kind of helps us do it a little easier if we know,
Yeah.
So
I think that comes with stepping outside of your bubble.
Yes.
And with everyone being able to connect with each other, our bubble has gotten so much bigger now that we're not alone.
Right.
Right? There's
that
people experiencing all of the different types of diversities. Right?
Yes.
Whatever the diversities are, whether they're neurodivergent diversities or just diversities, we're experiencing them through other people with things like TikTok and Facebook and television.
Right.
So our bubble has gotten so much bigger that we're able now to accept those things. And I really feel that, maybe 100 years from now, it will be so normal.
Right.
That neurodiversity will be normal.
Right. It's interesting that point. It's, I think that because of social media, we're able to see how other people cope with all of these different things that we all face. And it helps us to see that we are not alone in this. And we learn tips and tricks from each other. One glaring example that I see is I know Kristen follows the guy Struthless on YouTube, and he talked about his analog computer as his way of keeping himself organized as he's writing his book. And these are, it's really just a technique for breaking down a project. And, some people put it up on a bulletin board, and some people just write it in notes or an outline form or whatever. And, some people just put dates on their calendar. But by following people who have similar conditions or whatever, similar challenges that we have, we find other ways to cope with our divergent, what do you call it? Because they don't call it issues anymore. It's not an issue. It's not a disease. It's not a disorder even. They don't like using those terms. What would you call that, Amber? Our diversity, I don't know, it's like, our challenges, maybe, we all have different challenges. And so by learning, by watching other people, by following other people, by being in support groups or meetup groups or, Facebook groups or whatever, where you talk about these things, you learn.
So in therapy, we would call it presenting concerns.
Okay.
So not issues, but concerns.
Okay. Well, and
issues,
like I said challenges.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. Sometimes it's a challenge for me. Like I have time blindness. I know I have time blindness. I never knew there was such a thing called time blindness until I heard it referred to on a television program. And they were talking about a character who had ADHD and was diagnosed as an adult. And they talked about his presenting concern of having time blindness. And boy, this just huge light bulb went off in my head, because I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I do. And now I can look for ways to deal with that challenge in my life. And it's easy to find things that will help me on the internet, through social media groups or whatever. And that was not there when Kristen was first diagnosed with ADHD or auditory processing disorder or, any of those things. So, now we know how to deal with those things, but we didn't then. We had to figure it out on our own in a lot of ways. So
really, and the only coping that I got was using a day planner.
Yeah,
that was the most time, and that's broad spectrum time blindness coping.
Right. Well, and the like the auditory processing thing was, the big trick there that we learned was make a list. If you make a list, then you can't forget the list of things that were recited to you. Mm-hmm. So if you make the list, it's written, and then you have the list to go by. That was one of those things. So, but I really do. I've found a lot of things. I've found a lot of help with my planners online. Planners have been a lifesaver for me. And, I learned some things from both of my children in school using a planner. I always kept a day planner when I was in college, not realizing that was a coping mechanism for me. But I really, took it to the limits as an adult now, because I found all these other ways to incorporate my day planner into my life, mm-hmm. to control the things that I would normally forget because of my ADHD.
Right. It literally only took me 30 years to figure that out.
Right. Well, I was 50, so right. Or older. So, yeah. So I'm glad that these things are coming out, that people aren't afraid to talk about their neurodiversity, that it's not this shameful thing that we have to hide anymore, mm-hmm. because I really think we are all neurodiverse because we are all different in some way. And I think the more that we come to accept that we're all different and that the differences are what make us great, that's everything.
Mm-hmm. So if any of these things that we talked about kind of like struck a chord, ring true with you, if you're wanting to know a little bit more about your neurodiversity, if you are neurodivergent, you can speak with your healthcare provider and they can point you in the right direction to seek out help if you need it. If you're struggling with something like time blindness or
Depression, anxiety.
Mm-hmm, anxiety. Definitely reach out and talk to somebody and, talk to your doctor. And I definitely recommend checking out YouTube for coping mechanisms if you do have ADD or autism or someone in your family that does, because even if you yourself feel like you're neurotypical, you can learn a lot from people who are telling you why they are the way they are and how they manage their day-to-day. You could better understand them as well. And I definitely recommend, being more familiar with that.
I agree.
So for that, I think that's a good wrap up here. What are we talking about next week?
Well, we're kind of still stuck in the more serious topics, I guess, for just a little while longer. Next week, we are talking about March is Sleep Awareness Month. And so we are going to talk about sleep and some of the sleep disorders. And are you getting enough sleep?
Okay.
No. The answer is no.
Yeah, the answer is definitely no.
Well, we will explore that further next week.
All right. Looking forward to it. Bye.
Bye.